One of the most popular blog articles on my site, Creative Indie, is about how much do authors really make. And I want to make this video because right now on Twitter, due to the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a call for authors to share their publishing deals to highlight racial inequality and what authors are getting paid. So it's kind of nice because for the first time we can actually see the details due to the transparency, which hasn't always been the case, especially in publishing. A lot of those deals, there are coded words when you have publishing announcements like this was a good deal or a very substantial deal or whatever, and people inside the industry know kind of on average what that is, although there can still be a huge range between like 100K and 500K or something. But I wanted to make this video talking through some of that new information and also to add this video to the top of that article, which gets a lot of traffic because most authors have no idea what people stand to make both in traditional publishing and self-publishing. So I wanted to kind of break that down a little bit in a video. First, to my article, I was basically pointing out that the vast majority of authors lose money publishing. And that's an important statistic because every new author thinks they're going to be, they have dreams of grandeur. They're going to get a huge publishing deal. And if that doesn't work, they're going to self-publish and make millions of dollars because they really believe in their book. And unfortunately, self-publishing is $1 billion industry, but most of that money is in services because authors believe in the success of their book. So they think it's an investment to spend $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 on their book because sometimes people, author services or book launch promotional services or whatever, tell them that they can make $50,000 or $100,000 with their book. So they see it as an investment, and most authors are losing money. So most of what I try to do on this channel and with my platform Creative Indie is just educate authors to publish smart. And if you self-publish better without making the big mistakes like having the wrong cover or not writing a book to a market, not knowing who your audience is, not knowing if anybody's going to like it, you have a better chance at success, which means at least breaking even, because if you can break even, then you can start scaling up with ads. Most authors never reach the point where they can advertise profitably because they haven't built a platform, they can't get any reviews, they don't have a product anybody wants. And that can be really frustrating. So partly just as an attempt to put out some more information so that authors know what they're getting themselves into. But it's also really important to highlight some of the surprising differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. So what's coming out so far from what I've seen on Twitter is a rough estimate of how much authors get paid. And yes, this does differ drastically between minorities and people of color, which it's a case-by-case thing. It does seem to be happening across the board, and this video isn't specifically about that topic. But as a really rough, loose average, the majority of first-time authors get an advance of around $10,000 for a first book or for a first couple book. That's between like $5,000 and $15,000. That's what you could expect, I suppose, although I would point out I think there are far more authors who are silent who are getting much less or under $5,000. But as a rough estimate, I think $10,000 is a good average for a first book. If that book is successful and it earns out the advance, which the majority of books don't, I think it's 1 in 20 books actually earn out that first advance, then you might get into the next tier, which is around $50,000. So you might make $50,000 to $100,000, $75,000 even, which might be okay if this is like you've already had some success, you've already had a good run and earned out your advance. With some of those first books where publishers are just, they're buying up 20 or 30 books, 100 books, and some of them make money. Now the author is proven, and the market is proven, so now they're much more likely to give an author a bigger advance, which is probably in like the 50K or 75K range. And then the next step, the third tier, would be about $150,000 for a famous best-selling author you've probably heard of. It is true that there are publishing deals that go up to like $500,000. This was common maybe 5 or 6 years ago in the young adult fantasy space. where those books were just hugely popular and everybody was looking for the next Twilight, the Hunger Games. A lot of those deals were probably in the $500K range, and sometimes you hear about people getting like $1 million deal for a trilogy set, which is about $300,000 per book. But again, those are very popular, best-selling authors who have an established brand and audience. It's not impossible to get that as a first advance for an unknown author. It does happen sometimes, but it's rare. So for your first book, if you're looking to publish a first book with an agent or a publisher, probably 10 grand is about where you would want to focus on. And what I think I said in that article, and what I've heard from other people in the publishing space, is basically if you get an advance of about 10 grand, the publishing house is not really going to market the book for you because it's not a big investment for them. So they don't really have a huge stake. They're buying a lot of manuscripts and hoping one of them makes a lot of money. But unless you can get them to give you a substantial deal of 100 grand or more, then they're not really going to do much marketing or promoting for you. So a lot of authors, they don't want to self-publish because they assume, they don't want to build a platform. They don't want to market or advertise their books. They want a publisher to do that for them. And in most cases, that's not actually how things work. They might put your book out there. They will handle the formatting, the editing, the cover design, which is very valuable, and they'll do a good job of it depending on the publishing house. But they may not actually do a lot of marketing for it, which is why, again, most books don't earn out the advance. So let's assume you get a 10 grand advance. They're going to divide it into 3 payments and spread it out over 2 or 3 years. So you're not earning a lot of money. And even if you get, even if you're a career author who gets a 50 grand advance, that's still about $15,000 to $20,000 a year spread over 3 years. So this is why even if you're a successful traditionally published author, you're probably not making a full-time living with your books. And so the surprising thing with this Twitter feed, where people are sharing their numbers, even though it's sort of against the contract because the publishers really don't want authors sharing their deals with each other this way. Some of the really surprising things have been that some pretty famous established authors who I definitely know and respect are making less than a living wage. They're getting 15 or 20 grand advances when I would have assumed they were making much more. And it's also true that some of them, maybe they do earn out their advance and they do earn royalties, and so they're actually making a lot more. Not typical, but some of them probably are making at least some more than that. But even so, my basic point is that even if you are a successful, traditionally published author, you may not be making a living wage, or you may not be making lots of money. Even if you're a famous author, you're probably not a millionaire. You're probably making, 30 or 40 grand a month. 30 or 40 grand a year, which might be a livable wage. There's probably reports on how much professional, like people who define their career as professional authors, and they report their income. There's probably like an average of how much those authors make, which I would guess is a little higher. I think it's probably 50 or 60 grand. But that's, again, taking like all those authors who are making 10 or 20K who aren't reporting their author earnings as their primary career against those authors who are making $100 million like J.K. Rowling or something. So the average is going to be really skewed because some authors do make a considerable amount of money, but it's not very many of them. The vast average don't make money or don't make a living wage with their books, even if they're traditionally published. So flipping to the self-publishing side of things, and this is where things get a little messy because a lot of people will come to me and they'll say, I want you to market my book, I believe in my book. They're willing to invest, but I sometimes won't take their money because I don't like to make inflated promises where, I won't charge $5,000 if I don't think they're going to make the money back with their book. And I know from a statistical standpoint that the vast majority of authors lose money. So I don't want to be part of that industry, even though I'm providing a service that they want and they're willing to pay for. I just want to know that they know what they're getting into. So I'll usually be the voice of transparency where I tell people, it's very common to lose money with your first book. It's common to lose money with your first 3 or 4 books. This is a question I get all the time in various Facebook groups. where people say, I put out a book and I'm not making any money. At what point do I quit? At what point do I give up? I've spent money. I'm not getting enough reviews. I'm not making my money from this one book. And with self-publishing, you can't really just hire a service to do it for you. You have to build a platform. It takes time. You have to be writing to the books of the market. You have to learn how to have amazing covers and sales copy. You probably have to learn Facebook or Amazon ads. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. Often it takes several years to figure out enough about the market to be making money publishing, and it never really gets easier. And again, the vast majority of self-publishing authors don't make any money because they didn't write a book to market. They only have 1 or 2 books out. They're not trying to make money with their books. They're trying to publish the books that they want to read, and they're hoping that somebody pays them for them, but they don't really, there's a huge disconnect between the books that they're writing and the books that readers are willing to pay for, and until they solve that gap, they're not going to make money with their books. So the vast majority of self-publishing authors, but like 98% or something, are losing money, but it's not necessarily because self-publishing doesn't pay or that, the market isn't there. It's just that they're not doing things right. On the other hand, those authors who are doing everything right, they're making a lot of money. A lot of my friends are making 5 or 10 grand a month from their books. I know a lot of authors who are making 6 figures a year from their books. It is true that they probably have 10 or 20 or even 30 books out, which might sound crazy or ridiculous, but if you're really doing this full time and it's the only thing that you do, it is possible. Myself, I can pretty easily put out 4 or 5 novels a year, so 2 or 3 months to write and edit a novel and put it out. I'm not consistent with that. I know it's possible. I've done it in the past. I'm not consistent for myself because I don't publish frequently and because I don't really market my books. I probably make less than $500 a month from my books, and I have probably less than 10, but they're all standalones, mostly book ones. On the other hand, when we have a completed box set and a trilogy that we can market, and if you add into audiobooks, if you're advertising, and it's difficult to advertise consistently, but we have box sets that are making about $200 a day in profit, so that's 6 grand a month just from one trilogy. So that's about 60 grand, 70 grand a year from one trilogy, which is possible if you're doing everything right. It's difficult to predict because there are so many factors, and even our ads, like they're working right now, but then the ads will dry up. We'll have to change the targeting. We'll have to change the ad graphics and the pitch and the offer. We might have to refresh the covers every year or 2, which can be an added expense. It's not really just like a publish and ignore situation, although it can be for some genres. I mostly write in young adult fantasy. There's a lot of authors who really know what they're doing. So I have competitors who are doing things better than me, and of course they're making more money than I am, and they have more content. So until I have more content and I do everything right, I can't be competitive in that marketplace. But in some of my nonfiction books where there isn't very much competition, I can put out a good book with a nice cover. There's a big demand, and I can keep it selling with Amazon ads or Facebook ads pretty easily without a huge amount of effort, especially if I'm already getting organic traffic to my website, or building my email list automatically and putting my, book in part of my email funnel. There's a lot of things I could be doing to be setting up more organic evergreen sales, which is something I'm planning on doing. So it is easier in some genres. I do plan to start making more from the nonfiction books I've already published because they have a lot of reviews. They're pretty decent books. And then I know that with more visibility, they could be making more money. Mostly, I've given all my nonfiction books away for free for many years because I'm more focused on helping people than income. But on the flip side of that, I'm going to catch myself here because a lot of authors say they don't care about the money. They just want to help people. They just want to find readers. And the problem with that mentality is unless you are profiting from your book enough to invest in reaching new readers, then your book will help less people. So even the books, I feel like I'm helping more people by giving them away for free, and it's not actually true, because if I was making a couple dollars per book sold, I could invest in reaching far more people. So if I have good content and I want to help people, then I need to make sure my books are profitable so I can scale and reach more people. It's an important lesson because a lot of authors are actively resistant to thinking about the profit of their book. They hope it will be successful and they will make money from it, but they're resisting any type of marketing because they say, I didn't write the book for money, or I'm not interested in writing books for money. I want to write for the art or the passion or whatever. And there's a disconnect. If you're not writing for money, it means you are not providing a measured value that readers can recognize and pay for. Like, they appreciate and recognize the value of your book enough to want it and pay for it. So it's not just about the money. It's about providing something of worth to an audience who is willing to pay for it. I got really off topic in this video, but this is really important stuff that authors don't really understand about the differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. I typically prefer self-publishing. On the one hand, it's true that there's more pieces to figure out, but the opportunity, I feel, is also a lot bigger. I think it's easier to be successful and make more money self-publishing than it is to go traditional. And even if you are a very successful traditionally published author, you may not actually be making enough to live on, whereas with self-publishing, it's more possible to make a living faster. It's a different business model. You probably have to write a lot faster. You probably have to write more to market. You're going to have to learn a lot of things which a lot of authors don't want to write. So it might be a personal choice. If you don't care at all about making any money, you can just keep pitching your book to traditional publishers. But I would also caution you against, spending years pitching and then spending another couple years publishing. It could be 3 to 5 years before that one book reaches the marketplace, whereas you could have learned so much about self-publishing, and you could have probably written at least a trilogy or potentially, 3 or 4 trilogies in those years, which would give you a bigger backlist and make everything a lot easier for you. So it's not only about the money, it's also the opportunity cost of choosing one publishing model that doesn't teach you the right things and probably doesn't pay as well as you should be compensated anyway, as opposed to leaning into the self-publishing model and actively learning what you need to know, which is going to bring you towards a profit faster. So I hope this video clarifies a few things. I'm really excited by what's going on, and I don't mean that in I don't want to trivialize the subject matter, because it's obviously terrible that these issues have only come to light, and the discrepancies between racial inequality in the publishing system have come to light because of the Black Lives Matter movement. But I do think it is nice that authors are using their voice to share their numbers so that we can, as a whole, as the publishing industry, try to improve equality across the board, and at least introduce some level of fair play between different authors. Thanks, bye-bye.